Hey, good morning, Pat and Estella. Oops, forgot to plug that in. Yeah. So it's Ike Eisenhower, Dwight Eisenhower, and Estella. I have been to his home in Gettysburg too. Really fascinating story about that home. I don't have time to get into it. We've toured it as well. I know you guys. I know Glenn's a fan of Civil War history. I know you guys have been to Gettysburg a couple times. So have we. We just were there this year in July. However, hi, Anne. This year was very different given all the COVID stuff than normal. So I am reading a biography of Eisenhower right now, and man, what I wouldn't give for a leader like Eisenhower in the condition that our country is in. I'm just appalled by our choice for president. That's my personal opinion. Um, but so yeah, reading a biography of Eisenhower, and what's fascinating is Eisenhower is just a really great guy, a great leader. And one of the questions that I find myself asking of guys like Eisenhower and Abraham Lincoln and other guys like that is, were they good leaders prior to the crisis that they found themselves in, or did the crisis make them a good leader? And I don't know, man, it looks like I really got a bright light behind me. It's not my halo. It's anyway, I don't know what you guys are seeing, but anyway, so yeah, I think about that a lot. This question about, did the crisis make these guys, men and women, did the crisis make them great leaders, or were they just really good leaders going in to that crisis? And I actually think it's probably both. I think there was something in the character of these people, guys like Eisenhower and guys like Lincoln. I think there was something in their character that prepared them to lead during times of crises that made them great leaders. But I also think that in a really significant way, the crisis made these guys into great leaders. And I'm learning that about Eisenhower right now, reading the biography of him. I'm right now in the middle of his presidency, and just really fascinating stuff. But here's the thing. This is what's really interesting about Eisenhower. Eisenhower made a career out of the Army, as you probably know. And after World War I, in which he really wasn't able to be involved with in any significant way, Eisenhower stayed in the Army, but the Army was diminished in size, and there were very few promotions. So this is really fascinating. Get this. Prior to World War II, when Eisenhower came to fame, Eisenhower was actually getting ready to retire from the military. He was an officer, but very low rank, relatively speaking. He saw his career going nowhere and figured there was no future for him in the Army. And I think he almost had his 20 years in, very close to having his 20 years in. He was going to retire prior to World War II. And he and Mamie, because he had lived on a salary of a soldier, they really had nothing. They had no house, zero money saved. And that was true actually at the end of World War II, by the way, when he retired. But anyway, he was going to retire. They were probably going to be a farmer, try to find a farm somewhere that they could buy and farm. I mean, how different the world would have been had he done that. But this is what's really fascinating when you think about this. Here's a guy prior to World War II is thinking about retiring. And then you start to look at everything he accomplished after he was going to retire. And it's fascinating. So he got discovered by, as our country in the 30s was starting to gear up for what looked to be an inevitable war with World War II. And obviously, there was a whole lot of people, a whole lot of leaders in our country who were doing everything they could to stay out of it. Kind of the isolationist movement, none of our business. Um, and it really was a tough time in our country. But Marshall, who was chief of staff uh, for our armed services under Roosevelt, uh, General Marshall kind of discovered Eisenhower. He was looking for people with organizational ability, and that was one of the things Eisenhower did have. He was a good organizer. So he enlisted the help of Eisenhower, really just in staff settings to help organize things, and that led to, for Eisenhower, because he was such a good organizer and had some talent, invasion of. Looks like, okay, am I back? I keep getting these messages. Can somebody tell me if I'm on? I keep getting these messages that my internet connection's unstable. Oh, okay, good. Thank you, Pat. Which is the same message I was getting yesterday when I was hooked up at the farm, and I'm not. I'm here in my office. Anyway, so he led Operation Torch. All right, thanks. Thank you, Estella. The invasion of North Africa, and then from there he helped to lead an invasion of Sicily, and then obviously after that he became commander of Operation Overlord, which was the D-Day invasion, and then commander of all the forces in Europe. And anyway, I'm kind of getting ahead of myself, but it's fascinating when you think about this. Here's a guy who is going to retire. He was set to retire, become a farmer. And yet so much of his life was still ahead of him, and he didn't even know it. After the war, I mean, when the war in Europe ended, Eisenhower's probably one of the most popular men in the world because of his successful leadership of the invasion of Europe and conquering Germany. He led all the forces, all the allies in that effort. After that, I mean, when you think about what he did after that, after the war, he became, I forget what his title was, but like the military governor of Germany. After when Germany was occupied after the war, he took General Marshall's spot and became chief of staff for all of the military under the president, under Truman. After that, he became president of Columbia University, and he served as president of Columbia University for a couple years. Good morning, Patrice. I'm sorry. I don't know what's happening. I just keep getting messages, so I'm just going to keep going. So I apologize. I'm not sure why having these issues. Anyway, Eisenhower became president of Columbia University. Following that, he became supreme commander of NATO forces in Europe, leading up to, and I think even as part of the beginning of the Korean War. He was the supreme commander of NATO. Then following that, of course, he became president of the United States. All of that happened after this guy was going to retire. And it's a phenomenal thought to me that here's a guy thinking, I'm done, ready to retire. Let's buy a quiet farm and farm. And then he becomes a general, leads the Allies in defeating Germany in Europe, becomes a president of a unit, chief of staff, first of all, the highest ranking soldier in the country, president of a university, supreme commander of NATO, and then president of the United States. All of that after he was going to retire. And here's, I guess, one of the things I want to talk about is the fact that when he became the leader of, when he became a leader of some of those military invasions, Operation Torch, the invasion of Northern Africa, and he ended up being separated from Mamie, from his wife, for several years, and really got to see her rarely. He and Mamie wrote a ton of letters back and forth, and I've actually been reading some of the letters. Mamie published those letters after Eisenhower died. She made his letters public. So I've been reading some of the letters back and forth. But this is what's really interesting. And this goes to my question earlier of, did the crisis make him, or was he a good man? Was he a great leader before the crisis? And Eisenhower, in many, many ways, was shaped by the crisis that he found himself in as a leader during World War II. And I'm sorry. And in fact, he was changed so significantly that as the war started to wind down, World War II started to wind down, and Eisenhower and Mamie knew that they were going to be reunited. Eisenhower was going to do everything he could to get her to be able to come over to Europe so that they could spend some time together. Mamie and Ike, in some of their letters, Mamie was saying to him in her letters, I'm not sure if we will know each other, because she knew that Eisenhower had changed so significantly. And indeed he had. He was an entirely different person by the end of the war by the end of World War II than when he started it. And in many, many ways, that crisis that he found himself in, it shaped him. But he became better because of that crisis, not worse. And I guess the reason I'm bringing this up is my observation is that so much of what is going on is that right now, when I look at our leaders are becoming worse. They're not becoming better. What I see is leaders who are failing rather than growing. And Eisenhower and even Lincoln, going back to President Lincoln, these are two guys who grew during the crisis, and they became better for it. And Mamie and Ike recognized that Ike had been changed significantly. He grew, and part of what they did when the war ended, it was tough because Eisenhower was just universally famous all around the world. Everywhere he went, people wanted a piece of him, and it was really, really hard for him, for Ike and Mamie to connect, to rebuild their relationship, but they did. And then as chatting with Estella, ultimately they retired. They bought some property at Gettysburg. He had right after World War I, he had been stationed at Gettysburg to help train soldiers in the use of tanks. Tanks were a brand new weapon at the end of World War I. And he was in charge of training, developing tactics for the use of tanks. And that happened at Gettysburg, by the way. And he had learned to love Gettysburg and appreciate that area of the country. So he and Mamie retired there, bought a house. You can tour it if you ever get a chance. It's really a really cool tour to see his house at Gettysburg. Anyway, so I find myself asking this question: what is it about Ike? What is it about Dwight Eisenhower? Because guys, the bottom line is our culture, America. Frankly, we're unraveling. We are unraveling. And this is from kind of the leadership down. This is what's going on in our culture. You guys know this, that we're unraveling culturally, and looking for our garbage men. I made coffee for our garbage men this morning, and I figured as soon as I turned this on, they would show up. Oh yeah, so you were there, Kathy. I would love to see his boyhood home. Is it tourable? Like, is it a museum? You have to let me know, because I would love to see that. Really fascinated by him. But here, some of the things that I think led to Ike. I keep calling him Ike. Led to as if I know him. Led to Eisenhower becoming a really good leader. Oh, cool. Thank you, Kathy. Yeah, I'd love to see that sometime. Love to get out there. Three things that really come out, that stand out in Ike and Lincoln. I see these same qualities in Lincoln, and You're going to be collecting garbage, Estella. What are you working on? You working on garbage collection? Oh, that's amazing. But anyway, three things real quickly. And it's amazing to me. Like I have very skimpy notes and I'm like, this is going to take 6 minutes every time I do this. And here I am. Um, she wants coffee. Yeah. So three things. One, Eisenhower, in all of his relationships, did not look to defeat people. He thought that ideas were important. Now, he hated the Nazis. Eisenhower clearly hated the Nazis. But let me give you one example. Okay, yeah. I'm a little slow. Sorry about that. It makes sense. So after when Eisenhower won the presidential nomination, Lincoln did this exact same thing. Eisenhower won the presidential nomination and he defeated Taft. It was really close. In fact, Taft actually was accumulating a whole lot more delegates early on because Eisenhower was reluctant to get in. Eisenhower did not look to be president of the United States. In fact, he really seemed to not be anxious to get into politics. But he dove in, and when he defeated Taft the night of the nomination, the very first thing that Eisenhower did is he went across the street to the hotel where Taft was. And of course, Susan Eisenhower walked out. He was mobbed by people. But he found Taft, went to his room, found him. He shook his hand, and he said to Taft, "I hope we can be friends." And he worked on mending this relationship with a guy who was his opponent. He did not see Taft as an enemy. He did not look to defeat Taft as a person. For him, it was about ideas, and he did not make Taft into an enemy. Lincoln, if you know about Lincoln, Lincoln did the same thing. He actually, there's a book by Doris Kearns Goodwin, great book on Lincoln, and it's called Team of Rivals. And what Lincoln did is when he became president, the team of advisors that his cabinet was made up of men who in many ways did not like Lincoln, and they were his enemies going into that presidential election, but he knew they were good men and he did not look to defeat them. Lincoln was interested in ideas and bringing those ideas to fruition. That was something about Eisenhower as well. Secondly, Eisenhower had this tremendous sense of duty. Now, duty is one of those things that can turn ugly. In fact, I remember reading about Nietzsche. Nietzsche hated the concept of duty because Nietzsche thought that when you do a thing according to duty, you do it, according to Nietzsche, he said, is done without pleasure. There's no joy in it. And that was not necessarily the case for Eisenhower. Eisenhower looked at duty as a calling, which is what you and I have as followers of Jesus Christ. He looked at duty as what he was made for. And it doesn't mean that every moment is joy-filled. In fact, obviously going through World War II for Eisenhower, there was a lot of joyless moments. It was brutal. He came out of that war absolutely hating what war did and the devastation that war brought about. It killed, it killed people, and Eisenhower hated that. Anyway, I got to keep talking. There's a great story about his thoughts about that. Maybe I'll talk another time. And then, so for Eisenhower, what helped to make him a great person was, one, he did not look at this as an attempt to beat people, to make them enemies. Secondly, he had this tremendous sense of duty, which for him was about a sense of calling. And then thirdly, he learned when something bad happened, he paused long enough to say, what can I learn about him? His first two operations, Operation Torch, the invasion of North Africa, and then the invasion of Sicily, both of them went badly. Although the Allies came out of it ahead, there was a lot of unnecessarily loss of life because Eisenhower made some bad decisions, and he recognized that, and he learned from those, and he wasn't willing to just say, hey, this is war, that's the way it goes. But he paused long enough to say, What did I do wrong, and how can I do better? So this is just so key. This is what makes you and I as human beings. It gives us the ability to come out of a crisis better than when we went into it. And man, I wish that that's what we were seeing in our country right now. And instead, and I don't mean just leaders, but like our cultures are unraveling. And this crisis is unmaking us instead of making us stronger. And what we need is what is true in some of these guys. One, just the idea that we are not out to make enemies of people. We're not out to beat people. Secondly, a sense of calling. What are we made for? And Stella comment, that'd be a good series title. What are we made for? And then thirdly, learn from our mistakes. Take the time to figure out what we did wrong and genuinely learn from them. So, thanks for paying attention, and it's good to see you all today. So apologize for yesterday. I really thought I had it all worked out, and I guess some of you eventually caught up to what we were doing. So let me pray. My phone's ringing. I got somebody standing here that wants to talk. So let me pray, and then we will get on with our Fridays. God, thank you very much for your faithfulness to us. God, I thank you for men like Eisenhower and Lincoln and others, men who served our country so faithfully. And God, I pray for men like that, men and women like that right now. Pray, God, that we would have people who are interested in serving our country. And I pray, God, that you'd help us as your church, as your people, to be more effective at being the conscience of a country. Help us, God, to be able to go through this crisis. Help us to be able to do it in such a way that we come out of this as better people. And grow our spirits, grow our souls. God, this is a tough time. Our culture's unraveling. And I pray, God, that you'd help us, help your people to be here for such a time as this, to help guide us through this. And I pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. All righty, everybody. Well, thank you very much. And love you all. And see some of you Sunday, I guess. Yep. See you Sunday.